I'm a 54-year-old man who got divorced from my wife, who is 48, about 8 years ago. After the divorce, my daughter, who is now 28, stopped talking to me and sided with her mom without even asking how I felt. It's been tough for me to accept what happened and move on. My ex-wife made it worse by trying to ruin my reputation, but the hardest part was losing contact with my daughter, whom I love dearly. Since she was an adult, I couldn't be part of her life unless she wanted me to. She chose her mom's side without giving me a chance to explain. I don't have much family support except for my mom who has Alzheimer's. It's been one of the most difficult experiences of my life. Despite trying to reach out to my daughter multiple times, she remained firm in her decision to stay with her mom. At one point, my ex-wife threatened to sue me for harassment if I didn't stop contacting our daughter. That made it clear to me, so I stopped trying to reach out. Instead, I've spent the past 8 years looking after my mom and focusing on my career. I've had a few casual relationships, but I find it hard to trust anyone after my divorce. That's been my life for almost a decade now. I'm sorry if I sound negative. The reason I'm sharing this is because my daughter recently got in touch with me after all this time. I was thrilled, thinking she finally realized the divorce wasn't all my fault. It was especially comforting since my mother recently passed away, and I've been dealing with that grief alone, longing for some family comfort. So a few months after my mom's passing, my daughter reached out to me. I received a call from an unfamiliar number, and when I answered, it was a woman's voice on the line. I didn't realize it was my daughter because it had been so long since we last spoke, and her voice had changed. I was surprised when she introduced herself. She mentioned seeing on Facebook that her grandmother had passed away and wanted to check in on me. I was touched. I hadn't realized she kept up with me online, and I found it sweet of her. I thanked her for reaching out and told her I was okay, expressing how much I missed her. After chatting for a while, she suggested meeting in person instead of just over the phone. I was thrilled and agreed immediately. We planned to meet at my house over the weekend. I was really looking forward to reconnecting with her after all this time, so I'm sharing my excitement here. I hoped we could rebuild our relationship or at least get to know each other better. When my daughter arrived for dinner, I was both nervous and excited. It had been nearly a decade since I last saw her, and she was just a little girl back then, so I didn't recognize her at first. As we talked, the initial awkwardness faded, and we both began to open up. She shared details about her life and work, and I did the same. After dinner, we addressed the unspoken issue. I asked her why she never listened to my side of the story during the divorce and automatically sided with her mom. I acknowledged that her mom was more present as a parent since she stayed at home, whereas I worked long hours in construction. Despite that, I always made an effort to spend time with my daughter. She admitted regretting how things unfolded, explaining that she was young and easily influenced by her mom's portrayal of me as the villain. Since she never heard my perspective, she didn't question her mom's narrative. We delved deeper into this until she finally disclosed her reason for reconnecting after all these years. After hours of conversation, I sensed her discomfort, encouraging her to be honest. She confessed to keeping tabs on me through Facebook and reaching out after her grandmother's passing, expecting legal matters regarding inheritance. When that didn't happen, she decided to contact me personally. She explained that she had recently become engaged and was hoping for financial assistance with wedding expenses, understanding if I needed time to process her request. I felt like I had been hit hard in the stomach. After all these years, I had hoped for a chance to rebuild a family, only to realize that my daughter's sudden contact was driven by her desire for inheritance. What stung even more was that legally, the inheritance was rightfully mine, not hers. If she had been a better daughter, she would have been entitled to most, if not all of it. Money has never been my priority. I lead a modest life, content with what I have. Even if the inheritance wasn't an issue, I would have gladly helped with her wedding if she had approached me sincerely instead of using me for financial gain. These thoughts raced through my mind as I struggled to maintain my composure, and asked if her request for money was all she wanted. She became defensive, claiming that her primary goal was to reconnect with me and expressing regret for not doing so while her grandmother was alive. She admitted to wanting to reach out for years, but was afraid I wouldn't forgive her for siding with her mother during the divorce. Despite her reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was only trying to smooth things over to gain my forgiveness, and I wondered if her intentions were solely focused on the money. I inquired how she knew about the inheritance, and she recounted a visit to my late mother a couple of years before the divorce. Apparently, my mother had expressed her wish for her to inherit everything left by my father, who had passed away years ago, as she was the only grandchild in the family. Given that I have no siblings and my marriage was stable at that time, it made sense why my mother would say that to my daughter. Had the divorce not occurred, or had my daughter not distanced herself from me for so long afterward, the inheritance would have rightfully been hers, as I've mentioned before. But the realization that she might only be interested in the money and had given me false hope was deeply disheartening. Though devastated, I kept my emotions in check. It occurred to me that the true test of my daughter's intentions would be her reaction if I told her there was no inheritance. So I asked her about her expectations regarding the inheritance, and her estimate was surprisingly accurate, indicating some level of planning on her part. Then I broke the news that her grandmother had left everything to me years ago, and I intended to use it to start a business, meaning I couldn't assist her financially. I offered to contribute a few $1,000s from my own pocket to help with her wedding expenses. However, the disappointment evident on her face confirmed my worst suspicions. She expressed appreciation for the offer, but insisted that, as the sole grandchild, she deserved a portion of the inheritance left by her grandmother. I regretfully explained that my decision was final, and there was no room for negotiation. Her reaction was swift. She grew visibly agitated, urging me to reconsider. Firmly, I reiterated my stance, prompting her to lash out. In a fit of anger, she accused me of being the selfish person her mother always painted me to be and expressed satisfaction that I was alone in life. Despite the hurtful words, I was not surprised by her outburst. However, I was taken aback by her sudden candor. Before she could continue, I interjected, expressing my disappointment in her behavior and highlighting her attempt to exploit my grief over my mother's passing for her own gain. I reminded her that had she not cut off contact with me years ago, she would have received information about her grandmother's estate and potentially inherited a substantial portion. My remark seemed to stun her, prompting her to inquire further. What I intended to convey was that I requested her to unblock me on her old number so I could resend all the texts that were never delivered. Surprisingly, she complied. I proceeded to forward all the messages where I pleaded with her to listen to me and informed her about her grandmother's Alzheimer's diagnosis. It was a painful truth. My mother often mentioned my daughter during the early stages of her illness, expressing a desire to see her granddaughter before her memory faded completely. Recalling those moments tore at my heart, and now this ungrateful and callous child had the nerve to demand her inheritance. To her credit, I must admit that my daughter appeared remorseful after reading those messages. She apologized to me, but argued that based on the messages, it was evident that her grandmother would have wanted her to receive her rightful share of the inheritance, and it wouldn't be fair for me to deny her that. She admitted that she was young and inexperienced during the divorce and would have handled things differently if given the chance. Expressing a genuine desire to rebuild our relationship, she warned that if I prioritized money over our connection, she wouldn't feel comfortable continuing. Her words struck a chord, but I couldn't shake my doubts. While I wanted to believe her, I couldn't ignore the possibility of her ulterior motives. Despite this, I agreed to reconsider our relationship, but the inheritance was non-negotiable. Her reaction was one of anger and resentment as she stormed out of my house, and I made no attempt to stop her. Since then, I've sought advice from friends. Most support my decision, but one close friend suggests that since money isn't my main concern, I should consider letting her have a portion of the inheritance to maintain family ties. While I appreciate the perspective, I'm unsure about compromising my principles. The idea lingers in my mind, leaving me conflicted. Should I reconsider and share part of my inheritance with my daughter? Update 1. Hello everyone, I appreciate all the responses this post has received. Your advice and opinions have been invaluable to me. Let me address the most common question. What happened during the divorce? It's been a topic I've avoided discussing for years, but perhaps it's time to open up. My wife and I were married for 23 years. You'd think that after such a long time together, there would be loyalty, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. To put it bluntly, she betrayed me. I'd rather not delve into the specifics, but I discovered that she had been cheating on me with multiple men, a revelation that shattered me to the core. Unsure how to confront her, I resorted to heavy drinking and reckless behavior, almost ruining my life in the process. Our frequent arguments, fueled by alcohol, likely made it easier for her to sway our daughter to her side. After nearly a year of turmoil and separation, we faced each other and finalized the divorce. My ex-wife, who was a journalist and somewhat of a local celebrity at the time, utilized her influence to tarnish my reputation, and unfortunately, she came close to succeeding. Recovering from the aftermath of the divorce was an uphill battle, especially with my struggle to overcome alcohol addiction. My daughter's complete abandonment only compounded the difficulties. I'll admit that upon discovering my ex's infidelities, I spiraled out of control and neglected my parental responsibilities. During the separation and the subsequent year, I isolated myself and failed to be present for my daughter. However, once I achieved sobriety and restored stability to my life, my first priority was to reach out and apologize to her. Regrettably, she refused to hear me out and blocked me from all forms of communication. I had hoped that giving her space would lead to reconciliation, but 8 years have passed, and our relationship has only deteriorated further. Now, addressing the other pressing question, regarding my mother's inheritance. Technically, the funds belong to my father. My grandparents, both doctors, invested in various properties throughout the city during their careers, most of which were rented out and generated substantial income. My father passed away when I was 21, and he left everything to my mother. Throughout my marriage and for several years after my divorce, while my mother was still alive and well, all assets remained in her name. Upon her passing, I inherited everything as her sole heir. In the divorce settlement, my wife received no assets except for alimony, which ceased when she remarried a few years ago. Hence, as things stand, my daughter never had any ownership stake in our family's assets. She was aware that her grandmother owned rental properties and operated Airbnb units, but I refrained from accessing that wealth since my earnings from my previous construction business provided sufficient financial stability. I hope this clarifies any lingering questions. As for my daughter, she hasn't reached out to me since our last encounter, and I doubt she will. It seems evident that her interest was primarily tied to the inheritance, which is no longer on the table. While I can't deny feeling disappointed, I've learned not to expect too much from others, regardless of our relationship. With that said, I appreciate the support from everyone. It might be time for me to re-enter the dating scene and seek companionship rather than dwell on the past. Update 2. What a week it's been, folks. I thought my last update would be the end of it, but life threw me a curveball. I had just returned from work and was contemplating going out with some friends when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I opened the door, and there she stood, my ex-wife, my worst nightmare. She looked different, with a new hairstyle and a few pounds shed, so it took me a moment to recognize her. But you don't easily forget someone you spent decades with. Seeing her was quite a shock, to say the least. I was at a loss for words and stood there awkwardly. She then asked if we could talk about some things. I hesitated but didn't want to leave her standing at the door, so I reluctantly invited her in. The atmosphere was tense, as you can imagine. We engaged in small talk for a bit, and then she mentioned there were some matters she needed to discuss. I urged her to continue, and she revealed that our daughter had contacted her about the inheritance. It wasn't entirely unexpected. Why else would she show up after all this time? She acknowledged the hardship of our divorce and admitted to taking things too far. I couldn't help but scoff, but she brushed off my reaction. She then urged me not to hold a grudge against our daughter for the past. Paralleling my daughter's sentiments, she emphasized our daughter's youth at the time of the divorce and how it was unfair to harbor resentment for her choosing her mother's side. I interjected, clarifying that I harbored no resentment toward anyone anymore, especially not our daughter. What hurt was the realization that after all those years, she only thought to reconnect with her father because of the potential inheritance. I reiterated what I had told my daughter. Had they reached out earlier with genuine intentions, they would have rightfully received their share of the inheritance. My ex attempted to defend her actions, but I stood firm in my decision. I made it clear that further discussion on this matter would only waste time. I excused myself, stating my prior commitments, and suggested she leave. She nodded in understanding, apologized for the intrusion, and departed. After she left, I sat there in disbelief. I never expected to see her again, let alone engage in conversation in my own home. It was a surreal experience, dredging up old memories I'd rather have left buried. I later joined my friends, attempting to push the encounter out of my mind. So that's the latest development, and I needed to share it to unload the weight. Thanks for sticking around if you're still reading. Update 3. I've got another update for you all. This afternoon, while at work, I received a call from my daughter. Initially, I debated whether to answer, but curiosity won out, and I picked up. I wasted no time in addressing the elephant in the room, informing her that if the topic was about the inheritance, I saw little reason for us to converse. However, she assured me that there was something else on her mind. I allowed her to continue, and she expressed a heartfelt apology, acknowledging that she should have handled things differently. She expressed a desire for reconciliation and extended an invitation for me to attend her wedding if I were willing to forgive her. I was taken aback by her words. Seeking clarification, I asked if she was certain about her decision, to which she'd affirmed and offered me time to contemplate my response. With that, we concluded the call. I'm now grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, the prospect of attending her wedding fills me with joy. Yet, I can't shake the nagging suspicion that this may be a ploy to win favor and eventually secure the inheritance. Nonetheless, I'm torn. Declining the invitation could potentially sever any chance of rebuilding our relationship. I'm open to any advice or insights from those willing to offer them. Update 4. I've made the decision to attend the wedding. Many of you rightly pointed out that going couldn't hurt, and I see the logic in that. There's no obligation for me to reciprocate the invitation. And no, I won't be part of the wedding party. I'm simply a guest. I'm okay with that, recognizing that going from being estranged for 8 years to suddenly having a major role in the wedding would be a huge leap for both of us. It wouldn't feel right. I genuinely hope this marks the beginning of a new chapter, one where we can forge a meaningful relationship. Thank you all for listening and for your valuable advice. I truly appreciate it. Your well wishes are welcome as I embark on this journey. Stay tuned for more updates on our ongoing journey towards rebuilding our relationship.